Hey, it's Nikki, and this is the most efficient way to evaluate your guide team. In my experience, surprisingly few companies do regular, let's say yearly evaluations of their guide team. And I mean going on the tour, observing them, taking notes, going over their results with them. So then what happens is obviously this takes a lot of time, a lot of resource, so it falls by the wayside. But then when these same companies need to create some sort of hierarchy, for example, who gets scheduled first, that's a classic one, the criteria then tends to be based on things that have less to do with the actual customer experience and more to do with operations. So the most typical one is prioritizing guides who have the most flexible availability. I'm not a fan of this system for a few reasons. Mainly, it has nothing to do with the quality of your experience. What if your most flexible guide, who you're now going to give the tours first, is also your least amazing guide? Why are you going to reward them with more tours? Second, it can create frustration amongst guides who might not have full control over their schedule. You want to take your best guides, take them whenever you can get them, and inspire them to want to work for you more and maybe open up their availability, not chastise them and make them want to work for you less. It's counterintuitive. Regularly evaluating your guides is the easiest way to do a true quality check of your experiences. One of the only ways, in my opinion. And this means having equitable and transparent criteria based on your brand values that will strengthen your tour's consistency and increase brand recognition. So in this article, I'll share the criteria I use most often and give some tips on how to evaluate guides without stressing them out, because that's also very hard to do. So this is the criteria that I use most often on guide evaluations. I like to have an actual checklist separated into before the tour, during the tour, and after the tour, right? So it's very clear to guides what they're expected to do. The checklist should obviously be communicated ahead of time to guides so they know what's expected of them and what they're actually being judged on, right? I typically recommend doing a guide evaluation once a year with this checklist. Keep in mind, this is for guides that you've already hired, right? So it's less about, are they a good guide? Hopefully you haven't hired a bad guide, so we can assume they're a good guide. It's more about, are they executing a tour that represents our brand and is consistent with our tours that other guides are doing? Because tours evolve organically, right? So it's good to keep an eye on what's happening. So these are some of examples of things I might have on a checklist. Brand points. These are things taken from the brand and company values distilled into practical things. Typically, I offer 1 point per checked off item so that should guides need to be listed hierarchically for something, you have a score already. So it's kind of like, did they do this or not? Very non-subjective. For example, let's say your tours are all about connecting you with local culture, right? So on that tour, an item on the checklist might be, taught guests how to say hello in the local language. Check. They did it or they didn't. Gave at least one personal recommendation of a local shop or restaurant to visit. Right? Check. They did it or they didn't. Let's say you offer small group tours and you really pride your company on giving guests more access to your guide. The checklist item might be chatted one-on-one with each guest at least once during the tour. Check that off. For tours where you really feel like it's full service, you take care of everything from beginning to end, you make them feel taken care of. Points on your checklist might be offered guests individual direction at the end of the tour, right? Or checked in with guests halfway through the tour to see if expectations were being met. Right? That might look different depending on which guide it is, but it's a very general thing. They either did it or they didn't. For tours who pride yourselves on really highly qualified guides, you're going with PhD graduates or people directly associated with content. Maybe on your list is give their credentials in the introductions. For example, their education or their passion for a particular topic, right? They either mentioned it or they didn't. Other things you might want to put on the checklist are company expectations. So these are things guides are simply expected to do as employees. And these are things that should have been made very clear during onboarding, right? For example, is wearing at least 2 pieces of branded gear. Check. Arrived at the meeting point at least 15 minutes before the tour start. Check. Send a post-tour email. Check. Talks about the company in their tour introduction. Check. Has 50% review rate. Check. Right? I want to note, normally I steer away from things a guide doesn't have 100% control over, and reviews kind of fall into that. However, if you give your guides proper training on how to achieve a 5-star review, I really do think there are steps you can take to increase the possibility of someone leaving you a review. So I think it's still a non-subjective number you can include in their evaluation. So I do usually have that one in there. You could also include on your checklist objective guide skills. So these are the results of good guiding, right? Each guide is different and might have a different style or approach, but the end result should be the same, right? So the descriptions are a bit general, but these are something that you would talk to about your guides, explain to them exactly what it means, exactly what you're expecting, and you should also offer training or at least resources on how to achieve each of these. So, for example, the tour had a clear and interesting theme. Check. The tour had a clear and impactful ending. Check. That's a big one for me. The tour is interactive. Check. Right? It's not just a guide lecturing other people. The tour has at least one surprise wow moment. Check, right? Okay, so those are things you might have on a checklist. I try not to make it too long, just a couple items for before the tour, during the tour, and after the tour. But you might be asking, okay, but how do I evaluate guides without stressing them out, right? Because realistically, very few of us perform when our manager is looking over our shoulder, right? We usually perform worse than average. So here are a few ways you can put them at ease so that they can perform their best. Number 1, make it about the brand, okay? Assure your guides that you hired them for a reason and that you're happy with their work. And this is where reviews come in handy, right? I'm not a huge fan of using reviews alone, but it's helpful for guides. It does give them confidence, right? So it's like you get great reviews, people say good things about you, you're fine. Instead, say you're joining the tour because it's about brand consistency across your tours, right? So explain to your team the importance of brand consistency, especially when you have a diverse guide team. More especially so when you have multiple destinations. The checklist should not be personal. It's about the brand points being hit on every single tour, right? So you're not observing to see how good of a guide they are, how well they do. You're just simply making sure they're checking all of the brand points. Easy. Number 2, you can make it about the tour, right? There are multiple benefits of regularly hopping on your own tours, which I talk about often. So you can make this about evaluating the tour as opposed to the guide, right? Bring the guide in on it ahead of time. Let them know you're there to make sure the tour content still feels fresh and that the route's still the most efficient. You want to check up on the vendors, see how they're working out. You can even schedule time with them afterwards. Buy them a tea, buy them a coffee, a beer. Gestures like that go a really long way. And get their feedback, right? As soon as the tour ends. They know that tour so well, better than you ever will, right? So you can ask them, what do you think? What would you add to my evaluation? Would you cut anything? Have you started to include any material that you think we should include in the tour training? So again, it's not about the guide. Even if you are evaluating the guide, you're telling the guide it's about the tour, okay? Number 3, make it about the guests. Going on your tours is an amazing free way to do market research, which I think is highly underutilized. So maybe you're also evaluating the guides again, but you can tell them that your main purpose here is to talk to guests. Again, bring the guides in on it. Ask them if they have any thoughts on guests' reaction to the tours, to the content, if they would change anything, etc. And for the most obvious, use a mystery shopper, right? There are many companies that offer professional mystery shopping. I'm always available. I've helped a lot of teams create their branded guided guide evaluations in addition to doing the mystery shopping. However, it doesn't have to be an extra expense, right? If your evaluation checklist is easy enough to understand for a layperson, or if you could quickly describe it, you can offer to friends and family to join the tour, right? If they fill out an evaluation. You have cousins coming to town, or your mom's always wanted to see, what you actually do day to day. Have them hop on, ask them to fill out. Because again, it's an easy check mark. Are they wearing branded gear? Yes, right? If you have multiple destinations, you can offer free tours for employees, especially tour guides. This is something that's been super, super, super successful for me in the past when trying to create brand consistency and brand awareness for guides, right? Them being able to hop on a tour when they travel, super powerful. And then just make the requirement they have to fill out the evaluation form, right? And believe me, there's no one tougher on a guide than another guide. So you're going to get all the juice and, every single little eyebrow that they make. They'll note it. They're great evaluators. So those are just some ways. Again, you don't want to lie to your guide or make it like a big secret. It should be obvious that once a year they will be evaluated. But if people are constantly hopping on the tour for different reasons, then it makes them less like, oh my gosh, am I being evaluated? Let me do everything perfectly, and coming off not natural, right? So these are just some of the ways that I like to use it.